Alex, thank you so much for being here. You are a trauma-informed healing and dating coach, and you help women to heal from narcissistic and toxic relationships so that they can move on with confidence and start to create healthy, conscious relationships. Sounds amazing what you're doing. This work is important to you because of your own story. Can you explain how your life was affected by a narcissist growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I didn't even know I had a narcissistic parent until I had a narcissistic ex. I kind of found out about it in like reverse order. So, my like the Cliff Notes version is, I was dating, I was on Bumble, the dating apps, of course, not in a good place to date because honestly the a big chunk of my story that maybe not many people know is I actually got married really young and divorced very young because of some religious stuff growing up, and I thought I was ready to date again. So I'm on Bumble, I'm swiping, I get into this on again, off again relationship that basically was a year and 8 months of pure chaos, hell on earth. And if you've ever been in a narcissistic relationship, you're like, it's hard to explain to other people because it's such a mind fuck. I'm not sure if I can curse on here or not,
Yeah.
but it really screws with your mind and like the perception of reality of who you are and your ability to trust yourself. So it was a long year and 8 months of chronic cheating, chronic gaslighting, blame shifting, all of the standard narcissistic abuse tactics. But I didn't know that. I just thought this guy, if I'm being really honest, I thought this guy kept coming back to me because he loved me so much. Like that was really the mindset I had. And I think a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse, specifically in romantic relationships, think that, especially because of the societal conditioning of like, if they keep coming back to you, it must be really special. And it's like, or they're just a, narcissistic relationship cycle. So long story short, right towards the end of the relationship, I started learning about narcissism because, of course, in true fashion, I had to Google to try and figure out why this relationship was so toxic. Learned about that. And as I started connecting those dots, I started realizing, wait a second, this sounds a lot about like my mom.
Yeah.
and and then it all connected, and I started learning about trauma and how we're wired for patterns and why we're wired for patterns. And so basically I got into a lot of toxic relationships, and then this specific one, he actually was diagnosed with an NPD and confided in me about that when I broke up with him because I had figured it out enough that I was like, ooh, like. And so when I mentioned it, he had been to court ordered therapy because of some violence from his past, and he was like, yeah, when I was in court ordered therapy it came up. So I was like, oh, good to know. Cool, bye. Yeah, and then but as I've gone through this journey, the amount of love and compassion and trust I've developed with myself and the relationship I have with myself and the world that I've created for myself since then is so beautiful. So it's an honor to be able to take what I've been through and convert that into a ripple effect of healing globally too. It's really cool having international clients. But yeah, that's basically my story.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And I think so many people don't see it when they're growing up, obviously, because it is
No.
just so manipulative and it's just your normal. And
Yeah.
how did that affect you as a little child? Did you have mental health issues? How did it play out for you?
I did, but I mean, I had ADHD, but no one knew until I literally got diagnosed this year. And there's a heavy correlation with narcissistic abuse and ADHD because of the amount of brain fog and dual realities you're kind of trying to cope with. So, it's fascinating to me how our little brains will try and save ourselves as kids, and ADHD is one of them, right? It's kind of a coping mechanism. So that was one, but no one knew that. Everyone just thought I was a spastic child who couldn't sit still in her seat and had to be dancing all of the time. I would go dancing in restaurant bathrooms all the time and like
Mm.
disappear, and I would be doing like my 3-act ballet in in the bathroom in these restaurants, and people would walk back to my parents' table being like, I think your kid is in the bathroom, and they're like, yeah, she's been in there for 30 minutes, maybe we should go find her. Go ahead.
How does that actually work then? Because I've said this before, like I believe that almost all of those things that we get diagnosed with, the ADHD, all of those things I feel are connected to trauma.
Oh, yeah.
But then I get a lot of people just getting very upset with that. That's not how it is. You can't say that. So what happens? What is the ADHD reaction? What is the body doing in that trauma response?
I mean, it's searching for dopamine, right? Like dopamine's a happy hormone. And if we ADHD is a dopamine deficiency. So like you get up and it's one of those things when we experience what's called executive dysfunction, you know, we're numbing out, we're on the couch, like our to-do list is overwhelming, produces a lot of anxiety, so we kind of just start to get paralyzed. But when we're kids, you know, and we don't necessarily have a to-do list, the way we're reacting is we're trying to chase dopamine, you know. In adulthood we do it differently, you know, we lay on the couch and watch Netflix. As children we run around with in our underpants doing crazy stuff, you know what I mean, whatever it is, or
Yeah.
we're playing with our Hot Wheels cars, or we're nonstop playing video games, or we talk really fast, which I still do to this day, as you can see, in all of these different ways, because what we're just looking for that stimulus in our brain. And so that's why we're so impulsive sometimes, or we can get really hyper focused on things that do produce a lot of dopamine for us. So whether that's scrolling on Instagram, or like I said, playing video games, or and then unfortunately it can get, there's correlations with substance abuse too, same thing, we're just chasing the dopamine hit. And for kids, you know, when you see that in children, because I agree with you, there's a very heavy correlation with science now that it is linked to trauma. You know, we need to understand that being able to provide a space for children to exist as children instead of shaming them and trying to put them into these boxes of like behave, speak when you're spoken to, and we shame them for having human experiences like anger and sadness. You know, you have nothing to cry about, don't be angry, don't give me that tantrum. And then we grow up with adults who have mental health issues and wonder why. You know, it's
Yep.
because of we're not allowing children to be children, we're not creating space for them to be little humans, and so much more, you know, and we're invalidating their experience along the way, with which something as simple as that is a form of trauma. And a lot of people don't even know that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's almost like a feeling that you don't belong in your own family, I guess, growing up.
100%. I felt the term that really resonates with me is ugly duckling, you know? I felt alone and lost and, you know, not pretty, because I have a sister, I have a half sister who's 9 years older than me and drop dead gorgeous. And my narc parent loved to remind me of how beautiful she was and that I was the curvy one in the family, like just with the big nose and the double chin. Yeah. So it's just
Oh,
like, and those are two of my biggest insecurities today. And I laugh because I never noticed them until my parent pointed it out to me. You know what I mean? So it's like, and I share that because I want anyone who's listening to this to be like, oh yeah, me too. Like I've been there too. I've been nitpicked for things that are out of my control too, and made to feel like you said, an outcast. You know, I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like anyone was okay with me being the fun loving, carefree kiddo with all the energy, wanting to perform and hang out and fit in. And it screwed me up in a lot of ways, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you, you are beautiful. You are so beautiful. And it's just so like these things, we hang on to them, don't we? Like they just become a part of, oh, that's what I believe about myself. When in fact, it's just the opinion or it's really just the manipulation of a person who's trying to be manipulative. But that golden child dynamic, is that just a control tactic? Is that why it's happening in a family?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a try. I mean, yes, golden child slash triangulation. Cause sometimes, even with kids who are only children of a narcissistic family or parent, they'll be triangulated with other, you know, so and so's kid doesn't do that, which also
Yeah.
happened to me. And the reason they do that and they draw the comparison is because of that control. If I can make you feel shame around how you're existing right now, I'm going to get the result I want out of you.
Yeah.
And it's freaking painful, especially as a kid, because you don't get that. You just think like, oh, I'm bad. I did
Yeah.
something bad, so I'm a bad kid. And you
Mm.
have the shame. The narcissist plants that shame in you. Woo, real strong. and then it lingers, and then we don't know what we're dealing with, and we're wondering why we're severely codependent or why we're always comparing ourselves. Especially women, we're pitted against each other all the time. So it's like, oh, if she dyed her hair that way, I need to dye my hair that way. If she's perming it like this, then I need to do that. And if she's dressing like that, then I and it's just like, a lot of daughters of narcissistic abuse struggle with confidence because of that, you know?
Yeah.
Men too. I speak from a woman's perspective because I am one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for anybody that didn't realize that they grew up with a narcissist or a narcissistic parent, what are some signs, like looking back, what are the sort of things they might remember about growing up that would point to the fact that they had a narcissistic mother or father?
Yeah. Well, man, a part of me wants to be like, you were more scared of your parent than feeling safe. Like that's one. Cause I was, like I behaved not because I loved my parents, but because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. So that's one thing. That's one little clue. But there's a few things. Hypervigilance is really common, which kind of goes along the lines of the fear thing. Like I talk about this with clients all the time. Like I developed a sixth sense for footsteps in my house. So like I could be on the second floor of the second story of my childhood home and like hear footsteps on the other side going through the living room and be able to tell like, okay, that's this person, they're in this kind of mood. You just become very aware, and being like an amoeba, if you will, that can feel and then shape shift depending on how the parent is to get the end result that you need, which is self-preservation. So I remember always changing, the conversations, my way of being, depending on this narc parent's mood, so that I would escape being yelled at, being confronted, like whatever it was that I needed to escape. You know what I mean? And so that's one thing. Like if you can look, if what I'm saying like really is hitting home, you're like, ooh, yeah, like I remember being like sensitive to noises, being able to pick up on people's moods. Another thing is being gaslit. I was gaslit so much. Like I have vivid memories when I was 6 years old, crying over something and being mocked, like, do it for the camera, you're pretending, geez, you're so full of it. Like, and it's like, no, I'm 6 and I'm crying for a reason. Can someone hear me, please? Like I used to not be able to talk about that memory without crying. So this is like kind of really great for me, testament to my healing. But yeah, like you're made to feel like you're not allowed to have emotions, and if you have emotions it's your own fault. And the other thing I heard a lot was your brain is playing tricks on you, like, which is only further gaslighting to instill a sense of self-doubt in my own understanding and perception of things. So there's a lot of layers to narcissistic parenting. Blame shifting, I wouldn't be doing this if you didn't do that. Okay, that's not, no, you're an adult. You have self-control. Are you going to use it or not? So those are the big ones I would say, but there's lots of layers, and I have tons of content on it as well, if anyone wants to go lurk for more signs.
Absolutely. And so as you go out into the dating world, I mean, how does a person who is so used to, so normalized to that sort of abusive relationship with a parent, how are they going to ever recognize this in a person that they are going out to date? I mean, how does somebody do that?
They don't. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. And that's exactly why I landed my booty in a relationship with someone with NPD too. Cause it's like, we don't and for me, I didn't question my parents, especially with the religious aspect. Honor your mother and father was used as a threat in my household quite a bit. Like, so it's like one of those things where I wasn't allowed to ask why. Like, so critical thinking was shamed a lot in my household. And so I just took it. I took it. I took the abuse because I didn't have an option. Right. And so because my nervous system got so conditioned to surviving in that kind of environment, that became familiar. That became the environment in which my nervous system was like, I know this game. I know how to operate here. This feels normal. Even though logically I knew it was dysfunctional. I knew it wasn't right. I knew, I used to say like, she crazy. Like, I could recognize like something wasn't quite right. I had no idea that it was to the length and how not right it was until my mid 20s. And so what ended up happening for me was once I got out of this relationship and started connecting these dots, if we aren't conscious of the difference between what we have been conditioned to call chemistry and the spark versus our own anxiety and intuition saying, red alert, this person's not healthy for you, we're going to confuse those two signals. And let me tell you, all of my entire early, like teenage, not even early 20s, teenage years, who I lost my virginity to, all the way through like young adult, like getting married, getting divorced, dating, ending up in this relationship, all of it was unconscious. It was just my nervous system on autopilot, seeking out similar relationship dynamics, which means although I haven't dated 20 narcissists, I've only had the one that was diagnosed. They all were toxic relationships. They all very much had mimicked the trauma I had experienced in childhood, which is why they're called trauma bonds. So yeah, you won't, because it's been normalized to you. You don't doubt your parents until you doubt your parents. And it takes sometimes hitting rock bottom to be like, wait a second, that's not normal parenting.
I guess it's just being able to figure out that what you're actually feeling, isn't it? And that's something that takes a lot of practice, and often we don't know that when we're younger, but it is sort of figuring out that, oh, what's happening around me isn't right. And we just don't know those feelings. We just don't understand them until, because I mean, I speak to people who are 40, 50, 60, and they've only just figured this out. So
I know
it's just so manipulative. That's the thing, isn't it? You just can't see it. And that's the hardest part. It's interesting because I sometimes will put a post up about narcissists, and I get some people saying, oh, you shouldn't say that because not all narcissists are abusive. And I would have thought that was the definition of a narcissist. I mean, obviously it's on a spectrum,
right?
But a narcissist, surely there's got to be abuse within
to some
that
degree.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, people who, let's also be clear here, people who aren't on the narcissistic spectrum abuse people by accident all the time. People unintentionally gaslight other people all the time. Toxic positivity culture, perfect example. Good vibes only. Okay, so now on a day where I'm not having a good day because I ran into my ex at the grocery store and it ripped open a bunch of wounds because I had to be confronted with their face again. Oh, but now I feel shame because I'm not in good vibes only. Oop, need to think positive. Like some law of attraction stuff even can kind of start to slip into that. And it's like, I just want to be clear here that yes, we can make space for the fact that there's narcissists out there who are self-aware, who are doing the work and are committed to that and wanting to heal and grow. And that's wonderful. It's also very rare. Both can coexist. It's very rare for a narcissist to do that. Even mine, diagnosed, wasn't doing anything to change it years later after they checked the box for the court ordered therapy. So, and same with my parent, begged them to go to therapy and they wouldn't go. So I think we need to understand that if someone is being labeled, whether they're having severe narcissistic tendencies or they've been diagnosed with narcissism, that at some point there's been abuse. I think it's ignorant for someone to say that someone who has those tendencies or has been diagnosed has an abuse. I don't think that can exist. Otherwise, that diagnosis wouldn't be there. So, yeah. That's my personal professional opinion.
Yeah. And so being with a narcissist, one of the ways you might recognize you're in that sort of relationship is that it is running very hot and cold, isn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's to do with love bombing. And then can you talk about that cycle?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I love it. I love talking about this stuff because once you get it, it clicks and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like a crazy person anymore. Because a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse feel that because of this duality. It's like one day they're the soulmate, and that's in the love bombing phase. And I want to be clear on what love bombing is, because we hear that term and a lot of times we think of the standard definition, which is like lots of compliments, big purchases, things like that. Love bombing can be as subtle as mirroring you, though. Oh my gosh, you want to go to Italy? Oh, Italy's been on my bucket list since I was 10. How did you know? We're made for each other. Oh my gosh, you love giving back at soup kitchens too? I love doing that too. Every Thanksgiving, I go to a soup kitchen. right? Like it can be just a mirroring you and laying it on in that way. Where have you been all my life? We're just two peas in a pod. So that's the love bombing cycle. And the reason that they start with that is, let's be real, folks. If you met a narcissist on a date and they were like, I like to gaslight my girlfriends and you know what I mean? I'm going to blame you for all the problems in the relationship. You wouldn't make it past the first date, right? They're not going to give away their secrets. So they start with this tactic because it's a really great way to establish a false sense of intimacy, which means you're lowering your guard and you're getting emotionally invested in me real quick, which means that you're going to start justifying the way I'm treating you because now I already got my hook in, right? So that's what love bombing is. And it really, I remember when I was first dating my narcissistic ex, and I remember telling someone on the phone, it's just like, where has he been my entire life? Like, he's just such a good fit for me. I remember thinking that and feeling that and saying that in my Garden Grove apartment at the time in California. So it's just funny how those memories stick with us. From there, they go into devaluing. And this really can show up as like nitpicking, right? Don't talk to people like that. No one wants to talk about that. Ugh, when you do this, it's really annoying. You should be more mindful of stop biting your nails. Stop. It's so annoying when you do that. And like little things, it'll start with nitpicking. Oh my God, you're so insecure. Why does it take you 20 minutes to do your makeup? And judging, just these little comments over and over again. You'd really look better if you would dress like that, or if you would do your hair like that, just these poking little, and then all of a sudden it starts to escalate. And depending on the longevity, like the length of the relationship at this time, it can go into something as drastic as cheating, as drastic as, picking a fight for no reason, which can show up as boundary violating, right? Like you've set a boundary and they know that something they do pisses you off. They do it anyway, just to get that reaction out of you, which is reactive abuse and another tactic they use in this cycle, in this part of the cycle. Then it goes into the discard. And that's when they cut it off just cold turkey, and the reason they do this is to ignite all of your abandonment wounds, because the second that this begins to happen, they know you're going to fight harder for the relationship. You're going to cling tighter. You're going to want to chase them because you've seen the potential of the relationship. In the love bombing phase, they make it out like this is who I am. And then by the time you get to the discard, they have now done a 180 to make you the issue within the relationship. And this is when I get so many women coming to me being like, I'm the problem. I need to become a better person so my boyfriend stays with me. They're calling me a narcissist. And it's like, ooh, little do you know that the truth is probably completely reversed, right? And then from there, they go into the hoovering, which is keeping tabs on you, social media lurking. Sometimes they show up at your place of work to run into you or on your doorstep. They're blowing up your phone, emailing you. And then if you allow that hoovering phase to continue, and if you engage in it at any time, you're signing yourself up for another loop around the merry-go-round. It's going to start with love bombing again and every time you go back through the cycle, it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's a very clever way of being able to keep multiple supplies hooked at once in different cycles of the abuse, so that the narcissist is always feeding whatever within them they need to feed, whether it's superiority, confidence, love and connection, sex, you name it. But that's the cycle.
It's exhausting just listening to that, isn't it? It's like, oh my God, it's just so exhausting. But you can see how a person like yourself, who's been in that their whole life, and then they're in relationships, you really wouldn't see that there was another way. Like this would just be everything. And you mentioned reactive abuse. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, oh man, I laugh because I actually have, if you've also been a survivor of narcissistic abuse, you keep a paper trail and maybe screen record things to like look back at later and be like, I'm not crazy, right? That happened. So I actually have a video of one of my narcs in my life doing exactly reactive abuse. And it's kind of funny to watch back nowadays because it's so clear. But basically what they'll do is, whatever insecurity they know you have, or it could be a boundary, they'll just pick on that and pick on that. And at first you might be really calm and collected because you're trying to not let them get to you, right? And so you'll sit there and you won't engage, you won't start an argument, but you're hearing them do this, and it keeps happening. They keep trying to cross the boundary. They keep questioning the boundary. They keep pushing you, or they keep nitpicking you and making fun of you and saying these underhanded comments. And then all of a sudden you finally react because you're tired of hearing it. And that's when the narc will shift and say, wow, you know, guess I'm not the crazy one here. Wow. You're going to tell me I'm the toxic one. And they completely disregard their part in getting you to that escalated state. They're like, oh, so you can't control your emotions. Oh, you are yelling at me. Oh, you are abusing me now. Look who's the abuser. And it's infuriating for the survivor because they're like, man, I was so calm, cool, and collected. And you're going to completely disregard that and only call this out. Like, and it's that they do that though, for that reason, to make you feel more shame, to make you feel like you're the issue, to make you feel like you're crazy and to question yourself. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Absolutely. And we touched on gaslighting before.
Yeah.
Can you just go into that a little bit more so people can really recognize gaslighting? Because it's so manipulative, isn't it? It's kind of hard to see it.
Yeah. So gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse that basically causes the survivor to question their reality, their emotions, their sense of self, what they've witnessed. And forms of gaslighting, or I should say like different phrases of gaslighting, can be things like, you're so dramatic. Look at you making things up again. That didn't happen. Ooh, I don't remember. Narcissist's favorite is playing dumb. I don't remember saying that. I don't remember that happening. I don't remember doing that. And so they do that specifically for you to, again, not be able to have the confidence in yourself and your own memory to say like, oh wait, there is a pattern here. And that's why people get stuck in it for so long, because of all the gaslighting and blame shifting. They're like, oh, maybe I am the problem here. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to stay with this person and keep working on me. And they don't even realize that they're only this much of the problem, right? The narcissist is taking up 3/4 of space.
Yeah. And so if you know that you're being gaslighted, is there anything you can do in response to that?
Yeah, you can say things like, I know the way I feel, and that's valid. You don't get to tell me how I feel. My emotions are true. They have a place here. You can walk away if it's really like, if it's bad and it's with someone who is just going to keep like, don't even engage. Walk away if you can, because it's just going to be on a merry-go-round of chaos. You don't get to tell me how I should be thinking or feeling. Let's talk about this. If you continue to change the subject, or if you continue to not answer the question, I'm going to remove myself from this conversation. There's a lot of different just clever verbiage like that to use. And you can kind of take, what I just rambled off and mix and match your own words. But the biggest thing is to stay calm and use a gray rocking technique, which is a non-emotional, very factual, matter-of-fact type language, because the narcissist thrives off reaction, whether good or bad, right? If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you, that fuels the narcissist. They're like, yay, right? And if you're screaming at them like, oh my gosh, you drive me crazy, also fuels them because they just want the drama. They seek that, right? So, when it comes to dealing and negotiating and talking and trying to communicate or co-parent with a narcissist, one of the best things you can do is manage your own emotions. Don't give them that reaction. Save it for when you're behind closed doors and you can process your feelings in a safe space. Because the second they see you start to emotionally react, they get more motivated to keep coming because they're like, I'm getting my way. So and I bring that up because when you respond to gaslighting, you want to maintain that neutral tone, right? Put your lawyer face on is what I say. Like, you're in a court of law, try and remain grounded in that way, very black and white, matter of fact type information and vibe.
Yeah, no, that's awesome advice. And I can see, yeah, absolutely how that would work. And when people are coming to you because they're in these narcissistic relationships, is the answer always to finish the relationship, or is it possible to kind of work with a narcissist, or is there any point? I'm just interested. If people must feel like, oh, but I can change them. can they
all of the
really
time.
be changed?
No one can be changed if they don't want to, period.
Right. Yeah.
Like no one did my trauma work for me. I did, right? No one does your trauma work for you. You're doing it. No one's doing your mindfulness practice for you or your AM routine or making you food. You're doing it, right? Like we need to be the superheroes of our own lives. We need to reparent ourselves. We can't wait. We can't wait to feel like healing to heal. We can't, because I'll tell you, the way I got to the point in my life where I was determined, like, no matter what, I'm changing my life. It took me a while to get there because I was stuck in victim mindset for a hot couple years. Okay. But like, I got there because of my rock bottom. And I'm telling you, you don't need to hit your rock bottom. Anyone listening to this, you don't need to, unless you want to. But think of all the heartache that you're going to have. So like, that's my message to the world is like, let my experience download into your system. And let me tell you that if you hit a rock bottom, I know you can survive it because I have too. And it's not worth it to even go there. Start now. Start now. You've seen them prove themselves to you in this toxic way. That's enough. Start now. Create the reality. There's no time but the present, and it's the only asset that we'll never get back, right? Like we need to value that and just jump into the healing journey, because I can promise you on the other side of all of it is just so much wonderful beauty and abundance and joy, and I want it for the world. So the short answer, now that I've waxed poetically about that, is no, you can't change them. They have to want to change. And if the narcissist does want to change, it's going to require a qualified professional. They need to see a psychiatrist. They need to get a diagnosis. They need to be consistent in the work. They need to go alone. Alone. They cannot just only go to couples therapy. That's not good enough. You should probably do both if they're open to going to therapy and seeking the help. Great. If that is not an option on the table with your narcissist, I absolutely recommend setting either severe boundaries if you have to co-parent with them, or maybe they're a family member and for some reason you absolutely need that family member in your life. So that if that's the route, boundaries. Otherwise, cut them out. If they're not adding anything to your life, they're taking from it. And it's like, you don't want to live your life with a leech, It's like,
good advice. You don't want to live your life with a leech.
No.
Like that should be the slogan.
Yeah. Episode title.
Yeah. But you mentioned there that you had done reparenting as part of your healing. Yeah. What does that involve?
So I use parts work, and inner child healing is a version of parts work, right? We're dealing with the part of ourselves that is the inner child, but there's also a part of me that has anxiety. There's a part of me that's a business owner. There's a part of me that's a dog mom. There's a part of me that's an events manager, right? And like, we all have layers. And so when we do parts work, we allow these different aspects of ourselves their own voice, to speak up, to request their needs, to make it known, what they're going through, what they need. And then the self, meaning our conscious beings, we look at those parts and we love on them, meet the needs that they have, and educate them in the ways that they need to be educated. So my biggest thing with my inner child / reparenting journey has mostly been going back to that little 6-year-old who was mocked for crying and cuddling her in my mind's eye and just being like, I love you so much and you're so welcome to cry with me. Let it out. Like, my 6-year-old self needed that. She needed space for her tears. She needed space to be heard for what she was dealing with and how she was being bullied. And she needed someone to play with. Like, I play a lot and I talk about that a lot with inner child healing. Like, for example, the Harry Potter books came out when I was a child. I grew up and I was not allowed to read them because, the belief in my family was if I read the Harry Potter books, I would become a witch. So I'm reading them now in my adulthood as a 30-year-old woman. And it is the most cathartic thing to give that child, because all of those years, those 7 years as those books were coming out, I was ostracized from the book clubs that formed, from the groups at lunch that would sit together and read. Like, it was very, like, I couldn't connect. I didn't know who Dumbledore, Snape, and Hermione were. Like, you know? And so to give that to myself, it sounds so surface level silly, but it's actually one of the most cathartic, powerful things I've been able to give my inner child, because she feels included. She gets the memes now. She gets the jokes, right? She can look back and be like, oh, that's what they were freaking out about when this last book came out, you know? And she feels included, you know?
Mm.
So it's a lot. Yes, it's learning new skills. It's unlearning a lot of ways of being, because the other thing is being raised in a narcissistic home. I even had what's called being narcissistically defensive for a while, because I was so sensitive to certain things that I adopted certain narcissistic behaviors as a means of preservation and also conditioning. But the difference between being narcissistically defensive and a narcissist is the second I learned that wasn't okay, I stopped, right? So, you know, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. There's a lot of relearning that needs to happen. And there's a lot of feeling that needs to happen. We just need to feel.
Yeah. And just giving yourself permission to feel, but also not, I notice how much people still put themselves down, are still having all of those angry thoughts that came at them as internal thinking. It's like, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm this, I'm that. It's really about learning, no, I'm not stupid. And so many people blaming themselves for what happened to them as kids. And it's like, how is that even a thing? When you're a kid, you're not responsible for any of that stuff, you know. No. You've just got to give yourself some grace and just allow yourself just to be loved. That's the goal, isn't it? Absolutely. And so when you're with a narcissist and you know that you're done, what are you going to do? What is the first couple of steps to move out of that relationship?
Yeah. The one thing that every woman that I've ever worked with, talked to, who has left a narcissistic relationship, the phrase plot your escape rings true. And so there is a little bit more planning that needs to go into leaving an abusive relationship to make it as quote unquote easy as possible. And I laugh because it's not easy, and it's scary, and it's panicky, and it's all the feelings. So if you don't have a support system, I would say start there before you make a plan to leave. Whether it's your local's women's shelter, especially if there's been any physical violence, lean on your local's women's shelter. Please, 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 please look them up. They will support you. It's a free resource. They have ways to be able to take care of you and to help you come up with what's called an exit strategy, right? AKA plot your escape. So that's, if you have any physical abuse, please take heed there, because just full transparency, the most dangerous times in abusive relationships is leaving or when the woman becomes pregnant. So I don't want to like have this conversation casually without doing the due diligence of just saying, let's be smart about it. Okay. Because I want you to be safe. So that's the first step: support system, local women's shelter. After that, I would say if there is any time where they're going to be out of town, there's something where they're going to be gone for the day or something of that nature, where you can quite literally, if you're living with them, pack up and leave, great. If you don't live with them, awesome. This is going to be a little bit easier for you in the sense that you need to block them. And you don't need to have a breakup conversation. Like if you're in a discard phase, be in a discard phase. If you're in a love bombing, devalue phase, you can be the one to choose to leave. And I suggest you do. But then you need to take the next step. And I always try and make this like more fun, because obviously blocking someone's, it feels scary. It feels, especially with the emotional addiction aspect, you feel like you can't do that. You feel guilty about doing that because you know you're going to hurt them. But then you're also forgetting how many times they've hurt you. So I like to say block them like it's hot, and I like to sing the Snoop Dogg song to it to kind of make fun and bring some lightness and humor to the situation, because really it is something to celebrate. Like, you are choosing yourself when you block them, and that is so powerful. And here's the next step you need to take. A lot of narcissists will call even after you've blocked them, and it'll show up as no caller ID. Just trust me when I say, here on out, do not answer phone numbers or no caller IDs that you don't know. Only recognize phone numbers. And if it's an important situation, they will leave a voicemail, right? Like, just trust yourself, and don't be naive in thinking that it's just a random number, or it's a remote blocked call and it's not your narcissist, you know? And then from there, once you've separated and once you've gotten into a new safe location, or you've blocked them and just you've ridden those waves of the I've blocked them now and I'm feeling emotional. The next thing I would say is you need to look up healing, right? We got to get in there. And if the sooner you start, the better, because then you can jump into the future of your dreams. And so I would say, look up. Obviously, I'm here for you. If the way I coach and teach and talk resonates with you, feel free to hit me up. Otherwise, find a qualified coach or therapist in your area, you know? And
Yeah.
if specifically someone and with trauma, this is really important to me. Please look for someone who coaches or therapizes, if you will, with a bottom up approach to trauma. It is the most important way to heal trauma. It's the only way to heal trauma. It's the newest science on healing trauma. And unfortunately, it takes a specialized person because it's not mainstream yet. So I just want to say that because far too often I have people come, like today, a woman's like, I've been in therapy for 10 years and I'm not making any progress. And it's unfortunately because of the type of modality, right? So trauma isn't a one size fits all. We need to approach it specifically.
Wow, 10 years. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
you've
it's
got to,
awful.
I mean, just to anybody listening, I mean, if you're not getting results within a year, like
Months,
if you're not,
six.
yeah, if you're not
Yeah.
seeing yourself moving forward, like don't wait for 10 years. Like that's such a long
Yeah.
time. It's such a chunk of your life. And just because somebody is a coach or a
Yep.
psychologist or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're the right person for you. They might be
No,
working miracles for somebody else, but you've got to find the person that does move you forward.
exactly.
That's just a basic kind of thing
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people miss. So just talking about that trauma side of things, because obviously what is trauma in the context of a narcissistic relationship?
Mm. So trauma is trauma is trauma. So I'm going to just speak from like what's trauma. Trauma is anything that your nervous system is overwhelmed by, right? And so as a 5-year-old, your nervous system's really easily disturbed compared to a 30-year-old, right? Because the nervous system's developed in certain ways. So I want to bring light to that because trauma is a spectrum, just like narcissism is a spectrum. Something as simple as, this like the whole parenting aspect of let them cry it out in their crib, don't go. That was the most toxic parenting myth that ever went around because as babies, we can't self soothe. We rely on what's called co regulation, right? So I talk a lot about we need to emotionally regulate, right? When we can self regulate, that's amazing. Babies can't do that. They're quite literally dependent on their parents to co regulate. They cry, they need a parent's nervous system to tune into basically to say, "Ooh, okay, mommy's skin feels really nice and she's hushing me. She's shh, baby, you're okay, you're okay." They need that to be able to feel safe. That's what co-regulation is. That's why when you give your partner a 30-second hug and you feel like 5 pounds melt off of you, it's because you're co-regulating together. There is something powerful about that kind of human connection that heals, something as simple as that, right? But I want to bring awareness to this because a lot of times people are like, I'm attracted to narcissists, but my parents were great. That's great. You still have childhood trauma, and it doesn't mean that your parents were awful human beings either, right? Because there's a lot of wonderful parents out there who got a lot of shitty parenting advice and they just didn't know what they didn't know. Because unfortunately, there's no trauma informed parenting class yet. I don't know. Maybe I'll create one someday. But so trauma is a spectrum. It can be something as simple as that. It can be something like what I've been through and described earlier, a parent dismissing or mocking your emotions and needs. It can be something as large scale as acute trauma, which, little trigger warning here, something like rape, something like being mugged or shootings, things of that nature. Acute trauma, right? War, acute trauma. And then there's what we call complex trauma, which is a combination of both, right? A little bit of acute and a little bit of chronic, meaning like the letting them dismissing your needs, things that happen over a period of time consecutively. And so a lot of times with narcissistic abuse, it is a combination. It is complex trauma and it's usually complex PTSD in the clients that I'm seeing. So when we talk about trauma and we talk about healing trauma, this is why the nervous system work is so important because the first step you need to reach is safety within your own body. Because a traumatized brain and nervous system are always we either suffer with anxiety or depression. It's usually one end of the spectrum or the other, where we're always on edge in some way. And so first we need to reach safety, and then we can start to heal. So yeah, and that's all done through regulating, going back to where I started this.
Yeah, yeah. And so it can be physical signs that we're holding trauma, can't it? Like,
oh yeah,
even just exhaustion is a
yes.
sign that we're holding trauma. It can be in the physical body.
Yeah. A lot of time, trauma lives in the body. That's why we
Mm,
need a bottom up approach, a body to brain approach, right? We need to get the body on board before we can even get the brain to say, "Oh, okay, I can choose healthy positive thoughts," right? When you're traumatized, thinking positively is like, what? That's really hard to do. So, yeah, IBS, constipation, the runs, Crohn's disease, adrenal fatigue, insomnia, chronic muscle tension, right?
yeah.
If you grew up with any kind of like a little bit of my story has some I was spanked with the wooden spoon in the belt growing up, and I have like chronic muscle tensions in areas where I've flinched, so much. It's always right here. And so it's just like something like as simple as that, right? And so I can part of this is like, yes, I need a massage therapist and some cupping, and like, yeah, it's also emotional, right?
Yeah.
So sitting with something and this sounds so woo woo, and I remember hearing about this thinking it was so woo woo, like, you're telling me my muscles tight because of trauma. Like, I used to scoff at people telling me that because I thought they were like hippies and that this was some new age baloney. No, it is the most powerful, simple thing. And like you said before, like, it just makes sense when you sit down and actually think about it and understand how we're wired as a species, you know? And so I've had a lot of those. I've had a lot of the ailments I just listed off. And the good news is once you start healing your trauma, the root cause of it all, those things start to fall off, and think we obviously it's a slower progression to get the body to fully heal. I'm not saying like 6 weeks of trauma work and your constipation will be gone, your IBS will be gone, right? The body takes time to heal, but with the right stimulus and the right exercises and modalities, it will be expedited, right?
Mm,
So yeah, it's pretty crazy how trauma will, yeah, you're right. It's not just emotional trauma responses, it's physical ailments.
yeah. And healing from that trauma, how did it show up for you? How did you start feeling that you were healing?
Are we talking physically or emotionally or both?
Oh, both. Yeah.
Okay. For me, I would say like the emotional side I started seeing first, right? Because when Dr. Nicola Pera, the holistic psychologist, I'm taking this phrase from her because I love it, but I want to give credit where it's due. She says, your triggers are your teachers. And it's so true. I was a walking trauma response. I was triggered by everything, like burnt my tongue on my coffee, would get to work, on my way to work, someone cut me off. And it was just like negative, negative, negative. Everything upset me, everything dysregulated me. And so when I started healing, I started noticing how, one, I felt calmer. I was less anxious all the time. I remember the first time I was not in an anxious state. And I remember sitting on the couch and just being like, oh my God, is this normal? Like, is this calm? And I will say this, like, for those of you who, for me, like, I was hyper vigilant. I had a lot of anxiety. I was always like high alert, like waiting for something to happen. And I remember when I first started regulating and feeling what's known as your window of tolerance, right? When you're feeling safe and calm. And my window of tolerance was dysregulating because I was like, I'm not used to feeling calm. So let me like do something to be anxious again. Right. So there was a little bit of that in the beginning, like, because it was just so familiar that being calm was uncomfortable for me. So I just want to be honest here. And I started noticing that. And then I dug deeper into the regulating. And then I got addicted to regulating, basically. Like, it feels so, I call it nature's Xanax. When we can breathe, and even just something as simple as 10 nice, slow, juicy belly breaths. So, really from the diaphragm, not into the upper body. Something as simple as that can shift everything, right? And so I started to notice like this ability to like get cut off in traffic and be like, you have a good day. Like I wasn't getting mad anymore, you know? Something would happen in my life and I would say, you know, this is working for me, even though this feels really icky right now. I was able to be grounded in the hard emotions. And then, you know, at the time I went through a breakup with a partner recently, like that, let me tell you, breaking up with a partner from a healthy place from a toxic relationship, completely different worlds. And you know, when I was leaving my narcissistic ex, I would be by the toilet because I would be so dysregulated and anxious I would throw up. And this time it was like a couple tears and like, I'm good. You know, obviously there's other things that I needed to mourn or grieve, but I was fine. I knew I was going to be okay. So that's just like a testament over years of like how being in my doing this nervous system work allows me to be calmer, allows me to be present with uncomfortable situations and not allow it to ruin my entire day or to define how I'm feeling about myself, which is huge, right? Because that was the other thing, go through a breakup and it's like, oh my God, no one loves me. I'm never going to find my person. Right. That was the traumatized brain speaking. And now it's like, well, this is painful. And I know that that means that there's a better match for me out there. Right. But you can't get there when you're stuck in trauma. You're just like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world, is what it feels like. Right.
Yeah.
Then on the physical side, like I don't want to be TMI, but I'm gonna be to answer that question a little bit. I was chronically constipated since childhood. Like I remember being taken to doctors, having to do stool samples. It was awful. Little did I know, or anyone in my family knew. And I also threw up every month on the dot was another thing. I like a period before I had my period. I would just have a week where I would be throwing up all week. And it was because of trauma. My body was just constantly like not safe, right? And so it was exhausted. So I am happy to report back that my bowel movements are much healthier and easier. And so, and yeah, and part of that is being able to be if in my body, like being able to be in my body and allow my body to be grounded and allow my root, if I'm going to get super woo woo here, I'm going to talk a little bit about chakras, but like allow my root chakra to do its job, right? And like really getting into grounding into my root chakra. And like again, chakra work, I think for many is like, if I'm going to be honest here, like there's no science behind it, right? But I will say this, when it comes to the energetics and what we're seeing, the more we research trauma here in the Western world, the more and more we're finding that these Eastern medicines had it all along, right? So be open-minded. And that was something else that I also used to make fun of all the time was Eastern medicines. It's just funny how I've come so full circle. It's like everything that I used to think was like hogwash is stuff that I'm like, no, this is the way. This is the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. The fact that you were like vomiting like every
All the
month
time.
and just having that chronic unwellness as a little
Yeah.
child and just being able to change all of that around. Do you actually have a relationship with your family?
Nope. I'm happy to celebrate 2 years since cutting out my narc parent. My family, because of the dysfunction, you know, my father and my mother broke up when I was, and so unfortunately, since then, I don't hear from my father anymore. Love him so much. He's moved on with his wife. He's remarried, you know, and I'm happy for him. I'm so happy for him. I also totally understand why he might not want to connect with me based off of the way that I was with my narcissistic parent. Because this, if I'm being super honest, I was so brainwashed as a teenager. I chose my narc parent's side over, you know, his, unfortunately. And I, because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I spent more time with her than with him in my teenage years. And so she got into my brain and it really messed up my relationship with my dad, you know? But sending you so much light and love, Dad. But my mom, I have cut out August 2020, and it was a really heart wrenching conversation. It's the second time I cut her out, but this time's for good. The first time it was like 3 months. And then I went back hoping to like, okay, now that we've had a break, let's test the waters. Let's insert some new boundaries. Let's see if this can work. And things just spiraled. COVID was a really polarizing time for families. And so that was basically when, for me, like the nail kind of hit the coffin where I made my request to go to therapy. I was met with more verbal abuse. And so I just said, all right, well, then at this point, you know, I release you essentially. And yeah, so I don't have any contact with the one parent out of my own choice, the other because of what's just happened. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm only responsible for me and I can still love him from afar. And so, yeah, like that's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. And how is your life now? Because it just seems as if you're just in such a beautiful place. I can just feel
Yeah.
the energy and the vibe. It's just like a full circle, isn't it?
It feels good. Yeah, I love my life. Like, honestly, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful life. Like, oh, I'm getting a little emotional. I have such a beautiful relationship with myself and it feels so good, you know? Like, I want that for the world because we're the only person we're guaranteed to be around 24/7, so we might as well like ourselves, you know? And being able to like do what I do now and give back and like take the shit I've been through and help women heal and get to the same point in their lives where I am, where they feel empowered and they know how to regulate their emotions, they know how to deal with trauma responses and triggers, they know how to communicate in healthy relationships in a conscious way instead of just like allowing their emotions to emotionally react to their partners or people in their lives. Like, it's the most wonderful 180 I've ever done, and it's so fulfilling. So I'm really happy and at peace. Like, it's just life is good. I don't know how else to say it. It sounds so cliche and lame, but like it's just
Mm.
wonderful.
Oh, I
It's
can feel
wonderful.
it. And it's just such a beautiful testament to what a human can do, because
Mm,
growing up in that environment, any child that's vomiting and is in that sort of chronic unwellness, just to be in a place now where it's so different, it's just so beautiful. You have so much information to share with people, and you've got an amazing Instagram account where you post a lot of great content. What else are you offering people? Because you've got so much to give, and I think there will be people out there that will definitely want to come and connect with you.
yeah, yeah. So definitely come follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the Alex Scott. But when it comes to programs and things like that, I have quite a few different options when it comes to healing. So if you want to like dip your toe in the pool, in the healing pool with me, there's a really great Hack Your Nervous System boot camp. It's a 3-day long recorded mini course that has changed people's lives. Like, I'm actually flabbergasted by the feedback I've gotten. For example, one of the girls was like, she watched the replay and she said, just the way that you teach breath work and tapping within less than 24 hours, I am having a completely different experience with my practice.
Wow.
So it's just like the way that I teach and the way that I coach these things, it's just like I said, if you're curious and some of the things I've said have resonated with you, I think that's a great place to start. Other than that, I have my signature, I call them my healing tribe, my healing heart hackers. I'm all about hacking your healing. How do we do that in a safe and trauma informed way, but really get results quickly? And so there's different membership options. I have a 3-month, 6-month, and 12-month. So it's very flexible for budget, it's flexible for the time commitment, but it's a lot of fun because it's a community of women all dedicated to healing, all dedicated to healthy conscious relationships and really just creating a reality that they thrive in. And like I just said, like understanding and really embodying like having a wonderful life and creating what that means for you. So it's a beautiful program, and if you have any questions on that, you can reach out or head to my website and you'll find more info there.
Yeah. Can you just give us the website and the
Yeah.
Instagram?
Sure. So website is alexscott.com/HHH, Healing Heart Hackers, all lowercase, by the way, because it is sensitive. And I will say, just like a hot tip, my name Scott is spelled SCOT, just one T, not two. You'll get the soccer player if you put two.
Okay.
Which is super cool, but not me. And so, yeah, my Instagram and TikTok handles are at the Alex Scott as well with one T.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes, and please do
Thank you.
reach out to Alex if you are in any kind of stage of a relationship with a narcissist or you had a narcissistic parent. Alex is amazing. Alex, I love everything that you're doing. I just love that you've changed your pain into purpose. It's like you've woven gold out of something that was so negative, and I just feel like it's just beautiful what you've done with. And then I look at so many people and they're just so stuck in it. And I just love how you've woven this gold out of your experience.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your story and your knowledge with us today. It's been really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. That's so sweet of you. And yeah, I'm happy to give back. Thank you for having me on and sending everyone light and love.